Hey, Comics Cubers. Today's guest is Jeremy Adams, who recently concluded a 2-year run on The Flash, The Return of Wally West. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Jeremy Adams to the Comics Cube. How are you?
Hello, I'm doing well.
Jeremy, for the better part of 2 years, your name is Jeremy Adams. You were the writer of The Flash. You were the fastest writer alive, maybe. I don't know if you were.
Probably. That's what people say.
Why do you love comics? Is the first question I ask everyone who comes on my show for the first time.
Um, I mean, listen, the superficial reason is because it's just escapism. I love it. The first book I picked up was the Detective Comics that I remember picking up after I got like a shot when I was probably 3 or 4. The deeper reason is my dad had drawn some comic books growing up, and just a few. And so comics, obviously, I think because my parents were divorced so young, there was a little bit of like, my dad likes those things, so I'm into those things, and it was a way of connection. But I went far into the deep end of loving comics, and most of the stuff I would always be about quantity over quality. So if I could get like 5 New Universe books over one whatever book, I was going to do that. But I love comics because it's the best way to describe it is, and one of the things I try to do is, you're giving a vehicle for somebody's imagination. Like somebody wrote these characters, and I was out there every day with my friends playing Batman or Green Lantern or whatever, and that provided so many hours of entertainment and just imagination of thinking about outer space and what if I made a grappling hook and all that stuff. So it was a huge vehicle for my imagination off of somebody else's.
Let's clear this up for a bit. You said your dad drew comics. Your last name is Adams.
Yeah, not Neil, not Art. His name is Michael Adams. He had done a couple of ghosts for DC, and he had also written some Captain Atom for DC, and I think a 1 or 2 Alpha Flight for Marvel, maybe. So it was a very limited career, but at the time, it was bigger than life. The fact that, oh, my dad had drawn comic books. I never really thought. I guess some point subconsciously, I realized that you could do that for money. But it's weird. I understood that that could be a job, and film I did not think was something you could do at all. So
Really?
yeah,
Yes. So before we go any further, we should say that you are also a screenwriter. Specifically, you have written a lot of animation. So maybe we can
yeah,
get to how the differences and the similarities between the two
sure,
later. But as you were, what was your relationship like with the Flash, specifically Wally West?
yeah.
But feel free to talk about the others before you started writing the Flash.
My relationship was like, I mean, like anybody that spent any time in comic books, you you knew of the Flash. I think my first one was probably Barry Allen, whether it was Super Friends or Super Powers action figures, or actually, I remember the first television series was huge in my mind. But as far as the Flash in general, I would pick up comics here and there. It wasn't the one that I was obsessed about. I remember him showing up in Justice League Europe, and I remember digging that.
Yeah.
And then as I went further on, I would find out more and more about him before I took over the Flash, or when they asked me, did I have any ideas for the Flash? I had a ton of superhero ideas, and I had been reading up until that point, so I kind of knew a little bit about what I wanted to do. But a huge part of that first arc was me getting acclimated to the Flash and getting acclimated to Wally and doing a deep dive into Flash lore and Flash mythology, which, by the way, is very extensive. And as I was reading through Mark Waid's stuff specifically, I was struck by a lot of it. And by the way, I mean, I had read a bunch of Jeff's stuff. I'd read Flashpoint and seen what he had done with the Flash. But Mark's stuff, it just felt sticky. Like there was a lot there that he added to the character that I really gravitated toward. And so you could tell my first arc is me just getting used to Wally and how I wanted to approach Wally and how I wanted to speak it, or how I wanted to write Wally, which was much more like the Justice League Unlimited television series in a
Yeah.
way. And also Wally was at this time very much like me. He's a father with two kids, and I could write to that, and I could be authentic in that, and then take him on a bunch of different adventures. So yeah, that's kind of how I approached it. That's kind of where my frame of reference was for the Flash. He wasn't my first tier favorite character, even though he's risen in those ranks since I've been writing him. But he wasn't. It always felt he always felt OP. Like I was like, how can this guy that runs so fast ever be defeated? Basic physics. And then I was very much like, well, maybe he can't be. Maybe I just need to write him like Doctor Who and take him on really crazy adventures and stuff like that.
That's an interesting reference. I'm surprised to hear that you deep dove into the Flash when you started writing him, because I was reading your first arc and I thought I was clearly a fan of Mark Waid's Flash.
Like I said, as I went deep dive, I tend to, when I go a deep dive into something, I'm pretty hardcore about it. So Mark's stuff was highly influential in that deep dive, and obviously I had read some of Mark's stuff. I mean, I read some Mark stuff outside of Flash, obviously Kingdom Come and a ton of other stuff that he had done, Daredevil, whatever. But this particular Flash stuff, I had read some of it, but it definitely wasn't my primary focus. And there's pieces of the mythology, especially after Josh Williamson had done a 100-issue run. There's pieces of the mythology that exist that I wanted to play with and tool around with, and obviously Heroes in Crisis I wanted to address in a way. And yeah, I mean, I did become a huge fan of those runs post fact.
What you mentioned that DC approached you if you had any ideas for the Flash. So I have a question for that. Were you specifically approached to write Wally? Because when you took over, Barry was still the lead character on the book.
Right. It's hard for me to remember, but I'm pretty sure yes. I'm pretty sure yes. But I remember that the first thing in my mind was the elephant in the room was the events of Heroes in Crisis, and can I retcon that in some fashion? And most of the answers were no. And I'm pretty stubborn, so I just kept saying, "Well, we'll see." And you'll see in my run, like I'm absolutely pushing toward retconning it then and there. And obviously, I did it with the Surge, but I was gonna have Wally leap into Barry's body and realize what time it was and go racing and save everybody. And that was a big like, no, you're not gonna do that. So I just waited. Warner Brothers is a tumultuous lady when it comes to studios. So people would disappear and people would reappear, and I would still be there. So I was like, well, that guy's gone, and he said no, but maybe the next guy will say yes. And so eventually somebody did say yes, and I got to incorporate some of those plans I initially had into the 1 Minute War. But yeah, Wally wasn't. It was presented to me, hey, we're going to have Wally be the character, because Williamson was going to use Barry in Justice League Infinite, I think.
Yeah.
And so oh, okay, it's Wally. Great.
Yeah, it's so Barry at this point had been the main Flash for around
100 plus episodes or
around
issues.
15 years, and I always thought that since he was the one on TV and he was the one in the movies,
Right.
they were going to keep him that way. So that really took me by surprise. What was your initial proposal like? Like, how were you approaching Wally? Like, what was the hook when you sent the proposal?
I mean, literally the first arc, they had come to me and it was very much like, hey, do you have any ideas for the Flash? I mean, it was very like, oh, like it was a burden. And I was like, heck yeah, man, let's do Quantum Leap. Let's do this thing. And it was really effective for me to get to know the Flash family. And so what got me though, what really made me understand who the Flash was the fact that he had kids. And you can see he's funny and he's quirky, and Barry's in that first run too. But there's a moment where he jumps into his son's body and he's face to face with Ivory. And I remember writing that, and I remember like really understanding Wally as a father. because I'm a dad, and just and I had had so much fun in the segment before that with Kevin McGuire drawing on, which was super fun. And I was like, oh, I'm getting his voices like kind of silly and tongue in cheek. But the minute it was his daughter basically saying like, hey, you trained me to be a superhero. You told me how to do this. You were a good dad. I was like, oh, I kind of know who this is. And I can kind of go forward with his empathy and hope, and all the stuff that I'd read about kind of clicked, because it was like he's a dad, but he cares for others. He cares for criminals. He cares for um, his family and the world, and he's not callous in that way. And because I started formulating this idea that he is this paradox, that he sat on Metron's chair. He's seen the entire universe reknit, and probably all the universes and all the continuities, and he's also experienced trauma. So he kind of balances that in his head with extreme empathy and hope, and that's just kind of how I started approaching it after that.
I want to get back to that about Wally being
Yeah.
a dad, but I think I just want to point out, I think we're close to the same age. If you went back in time and told young Jeremy Adams that Kevin McGuire was going to draw a piece that you wrote set in the world of the Super Friends, how would young Jeremy Adams have
Oh,
taken?
my head would explode. I At the moment where that art came back, I was like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they fire me. Like honestly, I was like, I won. I won. And I tell Kevin this a lot. I've come to know him not like really well, but I've seen each other at comic conventions, and I still completely nerd out. And I still want to do so much more. Like I really want to do something else with him in the superhero world. But for me, Justice League International was just transformative. I have a somewhat of a pleasant relationship with JM as well. I don't know Keith Giffen at all, but those guys just, man, that book. I remember reading that book, and I'm like, oh, it can be funny too. Like it just knocked my socks off. So if I went back and talked to young Jeremy, he would be like, you're a liar, because it just seems so outside the realm of possibility. And me writing comics is just like, it is both totally unexpected and absolutely inevitable. And everybody that knows me pre, film or moving out to Los Angeles, it's like, oh yeah, of course this happened. Of course. Like they have no question about it. Like, yes, of
It's
course you're
awesome.
gonna be right. So
It's awesome. That's a good support system you have.
yeah.
Yeah, because you have a ton of great artists in your run, Fernando Pasarin,
Oh,
Marco Santucci, etc.
oh,
But
amazing.
Kevin McGuire on the
Kevin
Super
McGuire.
Friends.
I mean, I mean Kevin McGuire. Gosh, I wish he would do more. Yeah, but Fernando too. Fernando Pasarin has been the guy, and in the Flash, and especially like Zermanico and Green Lantern. But Fernando, he just had a way of like, he just understood exactly what I was doing. We talk about it occasionally, and I don't think English is his first language at all. So the fact that he can understand my scripts and then translate them, not exact, like just better, he
Yeah.
translates them like the best version I would see in my mind. And I'm always just like, oh man, I'm desperate to work with him again on something too.
I think it's perfect too because Fernando's style reminds me, it's like a 2023 version of the artists who worked on Mark Waid's Flash. Like,
Totally, I can see that. Yeah,
right. It's very, very close. But getting back to Wally as a dad, right?
yeah,
So you're a dad, so it enabled you to write Wally as a dad, and I think it also gives you the differentiating factor to a run like Mark's or a run like Jeff's, because I think Jeff, the kids were there, but I think he focused a lot. Wait, no, they were born during Jeff's run. What am I
yeah.
saying?
I,
Yeah,
I
and
think that's
then
right. Yeah,
yeah, so they were born during Jeff's run. And so I think that is the differentiating factor for as opposed in addition to a lot of other things, like you took Wally way out of his comfort zone. There's been a lot of talk in the last several years, last decade, 15 years or whatever, about superheroes and their ability to get married and live happy lives.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Clearly, you do not subscribe to the idea that they can't be, given your run on the Flash, but is that a case-to-case basis, or how do you approach that?
I don't know. I mean, because I think that's, for Wally, I think that's what makes him unbelievably unique. I mean, listen, I'm not ascribing this to me. I just know now there is the Superman family and the Green Lantern family, and like, there's all these extended family, and it seems very wholesome. I just know that for me, I think Wally is probably the most well-adjusted character in comic books, definitely in DC. He's and that presents a unique character trait that no one else has. So it's kind of fun to explore that, because I can understand people feeling stifled by those things, because where else am I going to go? How am I going to tell a story? Because he's got kids and he's got a wife, and I guess that would be hard. But my life didn't end right when I got those things. It became a lot more fun, and it was also a byproduct of the fact that DC, all the young characters had kind of been aged up. So in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, I've got to build my own Young Justice, which will be super fun, and
Yeah.
I got really excited about that. So yeah, I don't know. I understand that people do that, and I've heard directly from higher ups that, like, no, this person can't be married, or we can't have any marriages, or whatever. And I'm like, I don't understand it, because you're probably gonna erase the universe in a couple years anyway. So just see how far forward. Like, what's the worst that could happen? I think when Joe Quesada was running Marvel, one of the things I loved about it was there was just this, like, I don't know, was it 10, 15 years of just like continuous continuity that just felt like everything was connected, from Civil War to Secret Invasion to World War Hulk. Like, it just all felt like it was like the universe was pushing forward, and the characters were growing, and everybody had a logical, like, character arc. And I just like that. We've been with these characters for a long, 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 long time. So to be able to pursue certain things like that, I think are super cool. I mean, it's just like Tom King doing the Catwoman Batman stuff. It was like that issue where it was Catwoman and Bruce, or Selena and Bruce, and
Lois and
Clark and
Clark.
Lois,
Yeah.
is a great issue. And it's like, I don't see that. So like, seeing that is really neat to me. um Anyways, I understand some people believe that, but I don't think it's necessarily true. And I think the Flash kind of shows that you can do it and have fun doing it.
When you were doing the first arc, which is Wally quantum leaping into a bunch of
Yeah.
other speedsters throughout the Flash family, you mentioned that him going into J was a turning point for you. I want to point out that in the issue where he jumps into Jay Garrick's body,
Yeah.
you have a scene set in the Philippines. So I'm just gonna applaud you for that one.
Well, listen, it worked. It worked, as I was researching and just talking about World War II and thinking about the Ray. And actually, Mike Cotton, who is my editor, he had taken, there was like a little blurb from Grant Morrison, I think. And it was like, so it was really like one sentence, and it was like, yeah, what happened, like and what happened in the Philippines. It was like, boop, like that much. And we're like, we're gonna describe what happens in this moment that no one will ever see that line of dialogue. I'm trying to remember what it was exactly, but then I went searching about World War II in the Philippines, and looking at like uh temples, and I was just trying to figure out what it was. It was cool. It's a neat part of the theater that people don't really talk about.
Yeah, it's nice when people remember that we were in World War II.
Yeah, right.
It was important.
For sure. Well, I mean, listen, that's one of the things I pride myself on too, is I do try to find some of the obscure pieces of these characters' lore. Like, I mean, even Green Lantern, I didn't know that Hal Jordan was Jewish. I had no idea.
He is?
Yeah, and somebody mentioned it to me on Twitter, and I was like, really? And sure enough, it was like his dad was Catholic, his mom was Jewish, but he considers himself Jewish. So I was like, great. This is another piece of his character I didn't really know, and it's a fun thing to play with, and it's kind of interesting because he ends up being, I mean, earlier being the spirit of God, the
Yeah.
spirit of vengeance, and so I like that stuff. It's the same thing. People were the ones that pointed out about Harley, the Pied Piper, and how important that is to Flash mythology. And I was like, oh, people are really. And then I went back and read. I'm like, oh. And so I was like, I got to bring him back. I got to bring him back, because I think that's an important part of the Flash family. And I did. So, I listen and just try to investigate and try to figure out what's going on. And that's fun for me. It's fun for me to kind of like find out stuff. It's the Flushman issue where
Yeah.
these podcasts I did in Argentina, and them telling me about that, I was like, this is gold.
Flash is called Flushman in Argentina. That's
Yes, yes.
that's the
I
joke.
mean, because there was a Flash book, but it was a paparazzi tabloid,
Yeah.
so they printed it as Flushman. That's so silly.
One of the things that you went back that you really hammered in throughout this whole book is the idea that Wally West as a character is somebody who helps people. Like, he doesn't
Yeah.
give up on the goodness of people inside them, even when he's fighting the rogues. He's like, "Oh, come on, guys,
Yeah.
come on, you're better than this." Does that come from the cartoon? That one episode of the cartoon where he's like,
Yeah, I mean that's part of it, but I do feel like it was all there in the books a little bit too. The cartoon's very good at that. The books uh kind of bring that home sometimes. I think Barry punches people more. Um, but I saw it in the cartoons. I saw it a little bit in the books, but honestly, it was just the fact that in that first issue, when it's Wally addressing, or the annual, even when he's addressing some of the kind of recovery things that Roy had told him, and I keep thinking about, I think it was Flash Forward and some of the stuff that was post crisis, and him being like disappeared from the universe and him coming back, and like I said, him with the Tempest Fusionaut going on all these adventures. And I thought, here's a guy that has a macro view of the universe, and I think that he would have extreme empathy in that regard. And so, because he's seen it all, and because he's seen how terrible it can be, and he's also experienced how terrible it is, that he's like, I wish somebody would have given me a second chance. So why not I extend that hand to people, especially like the criminals. Now, it is both his strength and it is his weakness. So, here's a guy that can move faster than anything, and him putting a helping hand out to people or slowing down long enough to try to talk to somebody presents a vulnerability that sometimes gets exploited. But I think even in issue 800, when my little short story, where some of the criminals were like, "Oh, it's the worst. He wants to talk to you, like he expects more from you." It's like, I love that. I love that that's something they're just like, oh, gotta stay away from that.
"I want to be shown that I can be
Yeah,
better than me."
yeah, yeah. I think it's I do think there is something to that a little bit. It's like somebody's like, no, I know you can be better, and you're like, oh, I don't want to hear that. I want to wallow in my self-pity and the fact that I'm stealing a purse, or whatever.
When Wally gets back into full power, it's the Flash annual, and it's shown that the poison in the Speed Force is Savitar. I thought that was
Yeah.
a really clever move, because I think at that point a lot of people were expecting it to be, one of the Reverse Flashes.
Yeah, I didn't want to ever touch Reverse Flash or Zoom ever.
I was gonna ask that. This is the one character that you don't touch. Why is
Yeah.
that?
It's the same reason, like in Green Lantern, Jeff, Jeff and Mark, Jeff specifically, he exploits the mythology in such a way that's so big. I'm just like, what else could I say? What else could I say about these characters that haven't been said and done better? So there's a certain amount of like, I would be shooting myself in the foot if I attempted it. I mean, if something came to me and I'm like, oh yes, I know what it is, then I would give it a go. But with those particular characters, I didn't really understand them in some ways. And I also just like, it's been done like 20, a million times. So for me, I was like, those guys are off limits. I don't want to touch them, which is going to make it that much better when they do come back for whoever writes that. And obviously Jeff, I think, brought Zoom back in
800.
the 800. But they're intimidating to me. They really are. They're such a psychological character, and I'm like, I don't want anything to do with it.
There's other evil speedsters you can use if you
Yeah.
want that
Well,
particular.
and listen, especially when I first started, I'm new to comics. So they're saying, hey, you get to play in the toy box of DC. So I'm like, great, like Eclipso and Gem World. And I was all over the place, like all the time. And I was happy with that. You know, that was fun for me, is to be able to pull in characters like Mr. Terrific and Maxine and
Yeah.
just do that stuff. It's super awesome.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I want to talk about one very specific issue, which is number 776, which
Yes.
is the Dr. Fate issue. That
Yes,
one
yes.
made the rounds. I bought a single issue copy of it, and I talked about it so much that somebody bought me another copy of it because they thought I didn't have it yet.
I love that. I'm so annoyed though, because at the time I begged them to tell, the people that were doing the digital version, like, can you, put a little disclaimer up front that says lock your screen. And then even when the book came out, it just made me crazy that it would be like flip the book and then it would be a house ad. I'm like, no, it drove me nuts. But that's not on me.
No.
So I had a ball doing that. I had to print it out and record myself with the pages taped together about the right orientation. And then Fernando, I'm like, oh, there'll be a couple of gremlins, and he draws like 100 gremlins chasing these guys. And then I had said, I put these glyphs in the issue. So even if you play along at the end, it's like, oh, you got to find these shapes. And everybody ends up going back. And so he sends me these pictures. I can't find them at all. And I'm just like, oh, Fernando, you didn't put them in. He's like, no, they're there. They're there. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I was just at a convention last week in Denver, and somebody was like, I still haven't found them all. I'm like, no, they're there. And so we sat down and we went through it. What a fun. And I had conceived that as like a Doctor Strange story in my head years ago. And
Oh, so that's why Dr. Fate.
Dr. Fate. And I was like, oh, this is my chance. And to make it like a what I say, like a fourth dimensional causeway or something. I thought it was fun. It was.
What was the inspiration for that? Because that's something that only comics can do, and very specifically something only print comics can do. Now, somebody like you who is new to comics, like what is the inspiration for that one?
Oh, I mean, I read all these little kid books to my daughter, and there's tons of books like that are just very interactive, like clap your hands and turn the page and and I was like, oh, that's fun. And it's all very remedial when it comes to, circles and stuff. And I was like, gosh, this would be really cool to do inside of a comic. And I was also going to do a choose your own adventure, but they had done that in the Terrifics, I found out. And I was like, oh, I don't think I could do that, or I would have to do it differently. And my idea was to do it with Gold Beetle in some way. But that particular one was, it had started with the idea of somebody looking toward the reader and just saying, like, you've got to help us. Very never-ending story, and comics have done it from time to time. Like Grant Morrison did it on Animal Man. And but this was very much it wasn't oh, look, I'm looking at you. It was, you've got to help me. And I thought that was a little different and fun.
It's a very different tone from the way Grant did it on Animal Man.
Right.
Yeah. This one is like, yeah, okay, I'm with you guys.
Yeah. Did you get sent me a picture of their entire computer broken because they tried to flip it upside down and it slipped out of their hands. I felt so bad.
That's terrible. That's on him though.
Yeah, totally.
Did you get any pushback from that, from maybe from the higher ups, the editors?
No, there's a lot of because there was upheaval and staff turnover at DC, I think I got away with a lot more than I should have. I also think the expectation for the Flash book doing a certain amount was very low. So I never got hard numbers, but it always was like, hey, Flash is going to start low and that's it. We're going to try to eke it out. But it started growing, like the popularity started growing and people started talking about it. And that was great. And then it tapered off again. And then by the time they told me that they were moving me off the book, the next couple of issues were like 1 Minute War. And then those all sold out. So I felt like, oh, that's great. It was fun. And the word of mouth was phenomenal because it was just word of mouth. You know, fans were the ones pushing that book as much as I could. It was really fans that took it and ran with it and started doing things that may be slightly inappropriate but were hilarious. You know, always jumping into conversations of Spider-Man and telling people like, well, you should follow what you should read Wally, you know, like, I mean, stuff like that I was just like, this has nothing to do with me, but it's hilarious. You know? So
I recently told somebody who was looking for DC recommendations and he's a huge Fantastic Four fan. I
mm,
said you should read Jeremy Adams' Flash because it's very Fantastic Four-ish. You know, they
very,
go around very different, you know, there's time travel involved. You go to
yeah.
different places. There's a family dynamic. You should read. That's the one that I thought. It was a Fantastic Four comic in a way.
Yeah, no, definitely. And definitely moving toward that. I wanted to make a book too that anybody could read, like my daughters could read. And I've had retailers tell me they were grateful because they knew they could point anybody to that book, and it didn't matter how old they were. And um, that was such a huge get for them, because sometimes they'd have to be very careful about, oh, well, you could go here, but they'd have to explain something about, well, but there's, you know, there's going to be a lot of blood, or this is going to be dark, or this is going to be this. They could just go, you could read the Flash. Like that was like a go-to. That was the biggest compliment I could get, you know.
Yeah.
That's how comics were when I was growing up. You could
Same.
basically read anything and you'd be okay if your mom caught you reading it,
Yeah.
unless it was the Punisher.
I think that I think I told you when I was reading the first arc, the Quantum Leap arc, I thought
Yeah.
he's clearly a fan of Mark Waid's Flash, and then you bring in Heat Wave, and I'm like, all right, so he's gonna hit the familiar beats, and then immediately bring him to Gem World. You introduce Maxine Baker. You don't even tell the audience who Maxine Baker is. Like it's
I
just a real
know.
bonus if you know who she is.
I had so much fun. I just kept thinking, like, how far? Because usually there is a certain amount of like, you have to tell who people are right away, and I don't know. And maybe I just was too stupid not to do it, but it was so much fun to have that reveal of like, oh, she has powers. Like, yeah, my dad's, you know, Animal Man. It was great. It was
And
great.
she never even says her dad's Animal Man.
No.
Eventually, Wally's just like, oh yeah, this is Buddy's daughter.
Yeah. It was
I,
so funny.
I think that's a clever way to do it because I mean, you know, as a kid growing up in the 80s, I am used to people telling me to comics telling me exactly who each character is right off the bat. But in
Right.
this case, it's like if you don't know who this girl is, and then you eventually find out, it's a
Right.
really cool surprise.
Yes, that's what I think, and it made people chase down Jeff Lemire's Animal Man, and which is super dark, you know, and be like, what's going on? How did she get here? And I was like, yeah, how did she get there? Like that's a whole other story, and I definitely do that a lot. Like there are some dangling threads that I'm always setting up things either for me or other people to investigate. Like even at the end of my Flash run, we had planned for a long time. I had wanted to bring back Mr. Terrific's kid, and he was going to be autistic and you know, raised by Granny Goodness for many years, and but I wanted to bring a new character, a new kid into the mix with Maxine and Jay and Irie, and so you know, I don't know if they'll keep him around. You know, who knows if anybody will even remember that it happened. So
Well, there are several things from your run that are pretty dangling, and I want to talk about one of them, which is the Gold
yeah,
Beetle.
yeah.
The Gold
Sorry.
Beetle shows up in the first arc. She is clearly inspired by Booster Gold and the Blue Beetle, who the Blue
Yeah,
Beetle you did
inspired
right.
is a good way. Yeah. The amalgam. Yeah, yes.
The Blue Beetle is somebody that you wrote for in DC Showcase, the
Yeah,
animated DC Showcase. What
I'm a
was the
huge Ted Cord
inspiration?
fan.
Awesome.
I'm a huge Ted Cord fan. One of the first books I ever picked up was Modern Comics, Blue Beetle #1, and I remember just doing a deep dive as a kid. It was like an encyclopedia and learning about encyclopedia of superheroes. I don't know if it was a DC Who's Who, but I don't think so. And I remember learning about Dan Garrett, and I remember being so upset. I remember telling Jeff Johns this, like, you wrote the best Ted Cord story and the worst Ted Cord story when you shot him at the end. And I was like, I'm still mad, you know. And so I love Ted Cord. And then when Jaime, I mean, this is so bad. It's probably on YouTube. You could probably look up. I did a YouTube video, I don't know, probably 20 years, right when YouTube started, and it was like a breakdown of Dan Garrett, Ted Cord, and Jaime Reyes, you
Yeah.
know, and And I was like, Jaime Reyes, who cares? I want Ted Cord. And then you realize, oh, it's really good. And you totally get why they did that. But I
The
was a huge,
inevitable fan reaction.
yeah. It's like, and then you go, oh, okay. So what happened was my first book that I did was a DC, it was a future state DC 1 million Black Adam thing, and they let me. I needed exposition. I needed to figure out how am I going to explain this thing? How am I going to do this? Get Black Adam back in the past? And I was like, well, we'll get a time traveler. And then I was like, can I just make a character? Can I make a Gold Beetle? And it was going to be a guy, and Cotton's like, no, it needs. What if we did it a girl? I'm like, oh, that's even better. And I go, I want her to be like a mix between Matt Smith and David Tennant, Doctor Who, like really zany, really weird, and just out there and with like privileged information. And so that she showed up, La Cucaracha starts playing, and the Gold Beetle bursts through the door, and you're like, who is this person, right? And so when I brought her into Flash, and she kept calling him Captain, and you're like, what is happening? You find out oh yeah, her and Jay date. And it's like, once I did it once, I didn't want to do it all the time, but I definitely want it to be a through line of my series. I sometimes see people bring in characters too quick, and they just try to shove it down people's throats so fast. And that was never my intention. My intention was to bring her in, but very much tell her story in kind of a mismatched way, so that by the end of my run, the story I didn't get to tell you get her on the ship calling him Captain, and it makes sense. And it's like, oh, they were on a ship, and she thinks it was Captain, and they were going to go on a bunch of adventures that they mentioned in the first episode. And she was going to be my way to. I had this really funny thing where in Heroes in Crisis, Blue Beetle and Booster Gold are the ones that steal the clones, the clone of Wally in the future, to close the time loop.
Yeah.
And I wanted to have a scene. I never had enough time, but I wanted to have that scene where Booster and and Ted Cord are running out of the cloning factory, and as people chase him, I wanted Gold Beetle to walk right back in and just make a bunch of clones of all those dead bodies, and just like shoveling them out the Gold Beetle right at the moment the surge exploded. But yeah, she just became. I just I would do it every once in a while. Her and Omega Bam Man, and I would just kept going, oh man, they're letting me add toys to the toy box, and there's nothing like it. As a fan, you're like, I just added toys for somebody else to play with, and that's such a cool feeling.
When Gold Beetle first meets Wally,
Yeah.
are she and Jay already dating, or does that happen later?
And no, they aren't. I think they've had like a like the way that I look at it, and I'm still telling that story in my mind, is there's this like future carnival, and Jay talks about it in the 1 Minute War one shot, and he's like, if I see that girl again, basically I and they kiss. And so there was like a big flirtation, and then she starts seeing him on and off. I did want to have some sort of like love triangle thing going on, potentially.
With
And
whom?
there's a part of me of Maxine, because Maxine is so dismissive of Jay.
Oh.
But then I was like, it's too simple. So it's the same thing with like Irie talking about she's engaged to somebody, and who is it? And I know. But in my head, so yeah, by the time that he is there, let me think. Yes, so in the Flash run, when she's there, she talks about basically, like, oh, he's cute or whatever. Like they're in some sort of flirtation, maybe like a little bit of dating, but they're not in like a full-fledged relationship, which they do. So stupid, because I have that mapped out in my head.
All right. Well, if you're not gonna tell me who Irie is engaged to in the future, I'm gonna assume it's Omega Bam Man.
Okay, all right. Yeah, bro.
Speaking of Omega Bam Man,
Yeah.
like That was amazing. What the hell? Like pro wrestling, intergalactic pro wrestling. I think you there is such a huge overlap between superhero
Right,
fans and wrestling fans that
right.
has never really been
I
explored.
know.
Why is that?
I don't know. And when I did it, I thought, oh shoot, this is too good of an idea that I just gave DC. But I had, and I even did, I don't know if you saw it, I did a promo with me and my buddy, and like I got a custom belt made, and I was like challenging people to like fight for the wrestlers across the multiverse belt. I love it. I love the idea that he has this champion belt that gives him a bunch of powers, and it just made sense. I agree with you. I think pro wrestling is they're all like superheroes anyways. So why not make a superhero? And I also already established that they're an outlaw entertainment organization that the Green Lanterns have been trying to shut down for a long time. So I reserve the right to bring him into the Green Lantern series.
I was gonna say. I was gonna say.
I know what I want to do. I have to get through a bunch of other Green Lantern stuff before I can do it.
Is Omega Bam based on any real pro wrestler? Because I feel
I
like
mean,
I can
it's
answer
like
that question.
literally every wrestler in the 80s. I mean, like if you look at Jake the Snake and Hulk Hogan and Rick Rude and you like throw them all together, it's like they all have mullets. They
Yeah.
all, you know, they all look kind of questionable.
I was gonna say it felt like Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage
Oh, totally
melded into one.
inspired by all those guys I grew up with that I just like entrance music. It's kind of a combination of the 80s and the attitude era. You know,
Yeah.
there's so many of those type of things. And then I named two of the other characters, Kriegmeister 10 and Captain Pow Tower. You know, I named them for two of my friends, and I was like, oh, this is great. Like I can't believe they're letting me do this.
And, and it's such a great
Because
single issue.
right. Well, and because I feel like because I established that their ship has an algorithmic drive, in my mind, they showed up before Krypton was going to explode. Like it's an algorithmic drive that drops them off to places that are about to have an like apocalyptic event. And so I love the idea that somewhere on Krypton, this there's a show that went down. You know, it's so crazy.
Right as Superman was being born.
Yeah, exactly. And put him in the ship and across town. It's like, oh, the elbows from the top rope.
That is something that he said, that Omega Batman says, I would love to wrestle the
Yeah,
Kryptonian.
yeah, totally.
I need to ask because in the Gem World saga, you do have the Spectre showing up and
Yeah,
confirm the existence of God to Wally West.
yeah,
Is this reflective of your own views? Is this reflective of Wally West's views, or is this just, well, the Spectre is a thing, so
yeah. I mean,
definitely
that's the
there's.
thing in DC universe. It's like there's the presence, and the Spectre is the you know, the hand of God or the hand of vengeance for the presence, and it's supposed to be kind of the Abrahamic, you know, God in a way. Though obviously DC does their own things. So I part of it was that there was a piece of the Spectre, uh, part of the Spectre story that was going to dovetail a little bit into Dark Crisis that never really. I don't think it got the. I thought I had an extra issue, complete other issue of the Gemworld saga, and I didn't, and I had to combine the two issues into one. But I mean, I'm pretty I'm a pretty Christian guy, so I think there is a little bit of that like top of mind for me. But it wasn't me trying to do something proselytizing. I'll tell you what I was really thinking of. There's this great run of the Hulk by Peter David, obviously giant, legendary,
Yeah.
and there was the Rick Jones wedding episode, and the Skrull and the Kree are there, and then Mephisto shows up, and there's a moment where Mephisto shows up where the Hulk punches Mephisto out and says, like, I figure if you're here, if the devil is here, then God's here too on this holy day of matrimony. So he's able to like knock Mephisto out. And I thought, oh, that's really clever. And so because I had this Eclipso thing where, you know, you know, it was in the spear, the glaive, and all this evil was happening, but it didn't affect Wally. I was like,
Mhm.
I have to explain why it doesn't affect him. It's not just that he's a good guy. He had a little bit of protection in it. And because Eclipso used to be the spirit of vengeance, and Spectre is the spirit of vengeance, it all made sense. You know,
Yeah.
all roads led to the mythology of those characters in the DC universe. And I just thought it was kind of cool that God was like, you're okay, you know, and it's like, whoa, what?
You're
You
a
know?
cool dude, Wally
Yeah,
West.
yeah. I thought that was kind of funny. And you know, I grew up with like that version of God, like George Burns as God, you know, and like that kind of like, hey, you're okay, kid. You know, I think that's kind of fun.
The Simpsons god.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not the supernatural God, which, you know, I wrote on Supernatural. It's not Chuck, you know, who's kind of not good. So
uh we are running out of time, so I want to ask
yes.
about the genesis of the 1 minute war. Like, how did
Mhm.
that idea come about?
So the 1 minute war came about because I wanted to do my last couple of issues. I wanted to do those far earlier. I wanted Lynn to give birth to Wade, and it was going to be an issue that started out with Wally running as fast as he can, and he's tired and he's sweating, and he knows. And what we find out in the course of the episode is an explosion happens at the NICU unit where his kid is, and he knows he can't do anything. He can't get back in time, and he can't stop it. And he knows the minute he slows down, his kid's going to die. And it was just going to be this very sad thing. And the end of the issue is going to be there's a big explosion, and the next issue is going to be like the end of Amazing Spider-Man 2. It was going to be like the Titans with him at the
Yeah.
grave site, and it was going to be sad. And my editor was like, no one wants to see a baby's funeral, Jeremy. And I'm like, no, it'll be cool, you know, no. And he was kind of adamant. And I hung up the phone, and I just thought about how the world stands still when you run, because that was kind of the main conceit. And then I just thought, man, what if something affected them, him and all speedsters, that they're the only ones that are privy to? And it just kind of rolled on from there. And then I was reading some Matt Fraction books because I love Matt Fraction, and I was looking for a name for the bad guys, and I was like, Fraction kind of works.
It
So
does.
there you go.
Yeah. So that was an interesting story because you don't have the speedsters moving at super speed, or at least,
Right,
you don't visually show them moving, even though
right,
everyone is moving at super speed.
right,
So
right,
you had to really show into, like, lean into their characterizations and then their other
right.
capabilities. Or was that a challenge for you after around 30 issues of having written?
No, I think that's what was fun about the Flash. I kept building out that Flash family in a way for me, which was like, you know, it was about Wally. There was Wally and Linda, and Wally and Linda and the kids, and then bringing in other Flash characters slowly, like the search for Barry Allen, like Max, and you know, doing the issue with Ace. So this was not necessarily about the bad guys, because I think the bad guys were very straightforward. They're like, you know, alien colonists, you know, or colonials. And this was about giving this Flash family moments to shine, and giving each character a moment to shine. Because to me, Admiral Vell is still out there, and the Fraction is still out there, you know, and they haven't been defeated. So I always thought, oh, that's interesting, because it didn't become about that. It became about the people and my care and the Flash family. And that was really awesome, because that took a little of the weight off. I didn't I didn't want to make something. I don't even think I could make something super complicated. Like, oh, I just wanted to make each episode, each issue a thing where I could give hero moments to the characters and really push in on them, because there's a lot of people that just they don't know all the Flash family characters, and they don't know who they are, and why should I care about Bart and Ace and all these people with, you know, predominantly the same power? And then you just see, oh, they're different people with different things and different relationships. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed doing things like having Irie run around, you know, basically pulling her brother as a cannonball. And yeah, and Ace and Bart, I had them, I was writing them as antagonists, and it just very organically became, oh, they became really good friends. And that was fun too. And
That's one of my favorite tropes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And seeing Liberty Bell and Irie kind of like looking at her, looking up to her. And you know, I think that's why, one of the reasons she wears a jacket in Kingdom Come. Like, I'm filling in holes in my own continuity, you know.
Oh,
So
oh, yeah, you do emphasize that Irie becomes the Flash.
right, yes,
So
And
that's
I
straight from
believe
Kingdom
that.
Come.
Yeah, I believe that. I believe Irie becomes the Flash, and hopefully I get to explore that at some point in the future.
I hope that's a coded message.
It probably is.
I like that you established that Jesse wears a different costume depending on what is needed, because that's that's one of the things that superhero comics don't do enough. People can change clothes.
Yes. Yeah.
Go ahead, it's okay. um
Yeah.
let's get to the ending. So
Yeah.
Linda gives birth to Wade.
Yep.
Earlier on we found out Linda's pregnant, which is why she has superpowers, which
Yep.
she has super speed. Was it always going to be that way, or did you kind of want to have her have super speed for a longer amount of time, or were you always going to reverse that?
No, I wondered her. I had an idea of what would happen because I think her bio, in my mind, her biology would inextricably change post having a baby. So maybe she wouldn't have super speed, but I had some ideas of what other things could be going on because of it. But I also knew that I was going to be moved off the book. So at that point, it was, I have to be fair play in terms of, okay,
It's a
there was
nice
a lot.
name drop there. Fair play.
Yeah, it's true. So there was a little bit of like, okay, you can do this, you can have Wade, which was a big deal to give them a third kid, but you can't give Wade his powers. And I'm like, okay. And and then the Linda piece of it, I always had assumed that that was the reason she got the powers. So it makes sense that she gets rid of it. But I had some other plans for that obviously I'm not doing anymore.
And you probably shouldn't say it in case you get to do them later.
Right. I mean, listen, I leave a lot of holes for me to go back and tell stories.
Okay. At which point in the whole run did you know you were going to get taken off the book?
It was a couple days before Christmas, and it was.
What were you writing at that point?
I'm trying to think because it was before 1 minute, the first 1 minute war. So before the 1 minute, oh, I was probably writing. It was Mayor Wolf, as Lord of Order and Chaos, that kind of little arc there. I was probably writing that.
The one where the
Or
rogues are cops?
yes, I was finishing up that, and then yeah, I got a call, and it was just like, hey, the book's doing well, but we want a new tonal direction. And the first thing I said was, are the kids going to be okay? Because I was just so emotionally invested in it. And then they said, but we want to offer you. I was really sad. I was really bummed about it. And they go, but we want to offer you Green Lantern. And I was like, I was kind of bratty about it. Not bratty, but I was like, I don't know. And it was funny. I called Jeff Johns, and Jeff was like, "Yeah, yeah, man, you're gonna do great on You're gonna do great on Green Lantern." I was like, "Oh, okay, Jeff. If Jeff Johns says I'm gonna do great." And then we were driving up to my in-laws, and it was a couple-hour drive. And by the time I left, I was kind of like, oh, I don't know. And then by the time I got there, I was like, I know what I'm doing in Green Lantern. I'd figured it out. But it took me a long time. I kept asking, I kept wanting to tell people. Like, I was in 1 minute war. I was writing in 1 minute war, but it hadn't come out yet. I was writing 1 minute war, but it hadn't come out yet. But I wanted to tell people that I was moving off the book, and they really didn't want me to. But the reason I did when I did was because that helped me move on. That okay, I've said it, it's happening. There's no takesy backsies, and now I can kind of concentrate on Green Lantern more, because I was having a hard time concentrating on Green Lantern. I kept thinking about what Wally would do.
Of course. The Mayor Wolf makes the rogues cops thing. That was so awesome, because I didn't think I would ever mark out so hard for Hartley.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
I mean, and to me, I'm like, will someone address that? Because he's a Lord of Order, or he's an avatar for the Lord of Order, and these guys are cops. Like, that's pretty significant.
as I mentioned, I think that there are a lot of dangling threads left, and I'm not going to ask you to fill them out, because you might come back to the book one day. Who knows?
I hope so. Yeah.
At the moment we're recording, Green Lantern has been out for 2 issues. very quickly, what can fans expect from Green Lantern? What is your approach to Hal Jordan?
Hal Jordan is very much like Kevin Costner and Bull Durham. You know, Chris Pine is Captain Kirk a little bit. I listen, Jeff Thorne's run was this like really cool high concept sci-fi story. And so now I'm doing a very concentrated on Earth Hal Jordan story. And it's complicated because Hal is not beloved by everybody, especially Carol. And and there's a lot of like what's happening in space that we don't know as a reader. I know in my head, and we're going to get to it, but right now I want people to see who he is as a person so that when we get to it, it makes sense. And then I'll be dovetailing and going in and out, probably with Philip Kennedy Johnson about what we're doing. And I have big plans. By this time next year, the Green Lantern universe will look vastly different. And there will be a lot of explanations. And because I'm not one of those people that I can't hold a mystery for longer than a year at all. So, you know, it's not like people reading it are going to be like, when's he going to explain it? It's like, trust me, I'm going to explain. I want to get there as fast as everybody, but I want to do it organically. So yeah, it's what you can expect is it's going to be, you know, Hal Jordan with a little cocky attitude, but maybe a little humility from his years in space, trying to regain his life and figure out what life on Earth is. Like, why is he protecting Sector 2814, even though it's quarantine and he's not supposed to? So it's interesting.
You are following Jeff Thorne on Green Lantern, but technically you're following Grant Morrison on Hal Jordan. Is that intimidating at all?
Yeah, not at all. No, listen, the pressure I felt taking over Green Lantern was intense because I was like, oh, everybody seemed to like Flash. And so if I can do well on Green Lantern, I was like, oh, then people will, you know, there's all sorts of imposter syndrome. You just want to, I get scared every time I send out a script. I'm like, oh, this is it. This is where people find out I suck.
You're going to do awesome, Jeremy. Thank you so much for coming on the Comics Cube. Congratulations on your Flash run. Good luck on Green Lantern. Frankly, I hope you get back to the Flash someday.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Bye.